So yeah, we're here to talk about webhooks, a new capability in ArcGIS Enterprise 10.7. The agenda for today. So we'll start off by just talking about what a webhook is, what are the advantages of implementing a webhook. We'll go through some key terms, and then the demo will help you understand, how you can start using them with your daily workflows. So you saw this yesterday in the plenary, this idea of don't call us, we'll call you. And that's essentially what a webhook is. So let's say I need to drop my car off at the mechanic and I want to find out when it's ready to be picked up. I can either keep calling the mechanic and say, hey, is my car ready to be picked up? And he'll either say, yes, it is, or he'll say no. And depending on his answer, I'll have to keep calling him back until he has the answer I'm looking for. And so this is the idea of polling. You're continuously asking the system for information, waiting for it to reach a certain state. Alternatively, the mechanic can say, hey, Joel, go about your day. You don't have to call me. I'll call you when your car is ready. And that's what a webhook is. It's this idea that when something happens in the system will let you know. And so this is a new capability in ArcGIS Enterprise that's going to allow you to provide other applications with event-driven information. And that information is delivered as an HTTPS request, sent as a post. And you can use webhooks to create automated and integrative workflows. And this creates new extensibility in ArcGIS Enterprise. So kind of looking at this diagram, we have our users interacting with Portal. And so they're adding items, they're sharing items, they're creating groups. And let's say you create a webhook to subscribe to one of these events. And so a user shares an item, and that triggers the webhook. Once triggered, Portal will send out the payload to a webhook receiver that you've configured. And from there, the world's your oyster. You can use that to post-process. You can use it for operational intelligence, or you can integrate it with other systems and other workflows. So what are the advantages of using webhooks? So thinking back to the first story, it's more efficient than polling, of course. You don't need to keep asking the server for information. The server will let you know once it has that information. And so this allows you to create event-driven workflows that you can integrate across multiple systems. And so this is going to give you new and more efficient opportunities for automation. And so the scope for 10.7. So webhooks can be created, updated, and deleted by Portal administrators via the ArcGIS Portal directory, also known as the sharing API. So what that means is there's no UI or UX for this in the home app. You have to go through the sharing API as an administrator to create a webhook. And you can also create and manage your webhooks using the ArcGIS API for Python. Webhooks can be created to subscribe to events pertaining to items, users, and groups in Portal for ArcGIS. And for 10.7, these events are primarily create, update, and delete type events. And then the REST API doc was updated to document the resource. And so there's some key terms that we're introducing with webhooks. The first is trigger event. So this is the operation that is going to trigger your webhook. So for example, I can create a webhook that is triggered anytime an item is updated in my organization or when the item is shared. And your webhook can have more than one trigger event. So all of our trigger events are listed in the documentation, so you'll be able to see it there. But kind of looking at this, at the top we have /item. So it's following this URI pattern. And so this is going to give me all of the events below pertaining to the items in my portal. But I can narrow it down from there. I can go to a specific item by specifying the item ID, or I can go to an operation on a specific item. So if we look at the bottom of the list, I can narrow it down to listen to a specific item being shared. So anytime a specific item in my portal is shared, my webhook is triggered. And then users and groups follow a very similar pattern. So we have high-level user events. So that's giving me all of the events for my users. One thing to note, you see we have username /update. That's not an update to the licensing right now. It's just an update to the user's profile. And then similar with groups. You can listen to all events for all groups or narrow it down to a specific group. And the update operation, so these are updates to the group's properties or the user's profile or the item's properties. Next key term is the payload. So once the webhook is triggered, a payload is delivered to the specified payload URL in JSON format. and each event will follow a similar JSON schema as you see. So I won't go through all of this, but we have some high-level information about the webhook at the top under info, and so that gives us the portal that the webhook was delivered from and a timestamp, as well as we have some information about the events. So we can see here that an item was shared by a user named admin, and it was shared to everyone and to a specific group specified by the group ID. And so these payloads are intended to be thin. If there's more information you need, the idea is you'll call back into Portal to find that information out. And then we have the payload URL. So this is where webhooks become fun. So this is where you send your payload to. And all payloads must be delivered through HTTPS post. And so that means your webhook receiver must be configured to communicate over HTTPS and be reachable by the portal. And so there are a number of options for how and where a webhook is received. We included a sample in the Enterprise SDK for 10.7, which is a Java servlet. You can also use third-party services, which we'll look at in a bit, like Microsoft Flow, Zapier, IFTTT. And then there are also custom web servers that you can build yourself, such as Node.js and Python Flask. Okay, so Nalika, why don't you tell us what we can do with this?
Okay, thanks, Joel. So all of what Joel described sounded like a dev workflow, but if you are an admin, you can still take advantage of the webhooks to create automated workflows without coding. We have two demos lining up for you. First one is a simple workflow and the other one is a bit complex workflow. So let's assume that we have a group with some sensitive data in our ArcGIS portal, and administrators and group owners want to be notified anytime an unauthorized user is added to this group. And in this demo, we are going to show you steps on creating a webhook, and we'll show you how to trigger your webhook when a user is added to a specific group. And we'll show you how to configure the Microsoft Flow so that how can you notify the admins via Slack channel. Right. I think we have right. So this is the group that we have with some sensitive data, and we're gonna need the group ID. So Joel is going to copy that group ID, and with the group ID, we are navigating to the ArcGIS portal directory. Right. Make sure you log in as admin, because as we mentioned, the admins can only be managed the webhooks. Once you logged in, click on the org ID link and scroll all the way down. Under the child resources, you click on the webhooks link. Here we are displaying all the webhooks that has been created so far, and under the supported operations, click on create webhooks, and out of these parameters, name, payload URL and event are mandatory, while the secret and the configuration properties are optional. Secret is a user defined text you could add, and we will add that to the payload, and you can use that secret to verify the sender on the receiver side. And we have defined the deactivation policy here, which will tell portal when to deactivate a webhook in case of failure. So if there is multiple failures, it will be automatically deactivated. So before we go further, we're gonna configure the payload URL, and Joel is going to do that with Microsoft Flow.
Okay, so as Nalika promised, you can take advantage of using webhooks without any code. And so Microsoft Flow is a service provided by Microsoft that allows you to build these workflows. They have integration with tons of applications. I'm just curious, there might be some people who have already used webhooks with Survey 123. How many of you are familiar with Microsoft Flow and creating webhooks? Okay, so a good number of you. So this will be new for some folks. So essentially, I'm going to create a workflow. I'm going to create it from blank. And the first thing I need to do is define how my workflow is triggered. And so in this case, the workflow is going to start once Portal sends out that HTTPS request. And so I'll just search for that action, or that trigger. No. Okay, and so we have when a HTTP request is received. I'll click on that. Next, I need to provide a sample JSON schema. And so that way I can build my workflow off of this schema that I anticipate receiving. And so luckily in our help documentation, we've included a schema down here. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it. Next, so we want to know what user is being added to the group so we can verify whether they're an authorized user. And so we have some additional properties that are included in the payload. One of those additional properties is the username that's added to the group. And so we have a list here of all of the additional properties. And so I'm just going to copy that, and it'll make sense in a second why I'm using this. Oops. Okay. Next, I'm going to add a step. So once I receive my payload, what do I want to do? I'm going to add a condition. And because I provided my schema, I can now create a dynamic condition based on the keys that I'm receiving. So I want to know, does my username contain admin? So let's say the only person that should be added to this group, their username is admin. If yes, do nothing. If not, let's send a message to Slack. So great advantage of using a service like Microsoft Flow is they have tons of integration with applications, so it's quick and easy to get started. So I'm going to post a message, and I'm going to send it to a channel where all my managers are listening. I'm going to say, hey managers, the following user, and I can pull data from my payload, was added to this group, and I'll pull in the group ID, but is not authorized. You should do something about this. Okay, and so that's it. I'll hit save. Once I hit save, I'll have a payload URL that I can use, and I'll switch back over to Malika to finish this off.
So, all right, great. So we have the payload URL. Next thing what we wanted to do is find out the event. As we mentioned, we want our webhook to be triggered whenever user is added to a specific group. So let's navigate back to the help document and see whether we have an event that we could use. So under the groups, we see that add users event is supported. So we're going to use that, copy that, and going to replace our group ID with our group ID. Right. So now we have everything ready to create the webhook. When we hit the create webhook button, behind the scene Portal is going to ping that payload URL just to make sure that it can be reachable. Otherwise, you won't be able to create the webhook. So you can see that it's successfully created. And if you go back to webhooks link, you should be you can see the new webhook that we just created. So we have the webhooks. Now let's navigate back to the portal and add a user, non-authorized user to this group, so that we can see a message in the Slack. So we're going to use the add members method because that's what we have subscribed to. Okay, great. Okay, so yeah. So we have the message saying that the user is unauthorized and it has been added to our group, right? So just like that, we use a third-party tool to automate a simple workflow using webhooks. You can take advantage of similar services like IFTTT or Zapier to achieve similar workflows. So for developer community like you guys, This new capability will allow you to extend the ArcGIS Enterprise portal in new creative ways. With Enterprise SDK 10.7, we are shipping a sample webhook receiver application, and this receiver can receive incoming webhook payloads and simply write to a file, and can be deployed into Java servlet container like Apache Tomcat. You need to make sure you enable the SSL because we only support the HTTPS traffic. So let's look at our second scenario. And our organization has such standards, for example, for any items shared to the public. And they want to automate the workflow so that when these standards are not met, inform the admins. Right? And these standards could be whether the item has enough tags or enough description, or whether it meets the item completeness score, for example. So let's quickly take a look at this workflow. User shares an item to the public, and the payload is sent out, and this payload is received by the Java servlet and writes to the file. And using the Python API for ArcGIS, we're going to do a call back to the portal and examine the item properties and check for these standards. If these are not met, we're going to inform the managers via Slack channel, and managers can take action, like they can unshare or they can even add the appropriate tags. Right? So let's switch. So if you install the ArcGIS Enterprise SDK, you can see this sample receiver application under samples. It's called, under the Java, it's called the Webhook Listener. And if you're familiar with the Java, you can see that this is a simple servlet listening to a post request, and it just processes it and writes to a file. Right? So we have already deployed this sample application in Tomcat server, and right now it's listening on port 8443. Okay. And also we have a webhook created for this purpose, and it's listening to all item changes. So whenever item is changed, it will trigger an event. Right? So let's, since we have everything now, Joel is going to share an item to public and walk us through.
Okay, so this is our item. We can see it has an incomplete description. Doesn't really have all the tags it should have, and it's probably not ready to be shared out to the public, but the user does it anyways. And so this is going to trigger the webhook, and that webhook is going to fire off our Python script. Python script is going to receive this payload. It's going to analyze the item by calling back into portal and checking these properties. It's going to look at the description, it's going to look at the tags, and it's going to tell us whether this item was actually ready to be shared to the public or not. And so we got a message in Slack, and so we have this little Slack admin bot, and it tells us the following item was shared to the public, but does not meet all of the requirements. And I can see why. So the item was missing the following tags, the description was not long enough, and the score completeness was not at least 70%. And so now I have the option to react to this within Slack. And so the bot is saying, how do I want to proceed? So let's say I want to add my tags back in. So I'm going to say, add tags. I can see what tags are missing, so I'll add those back in. Okay. So I'll send that back, and then this, basically we have this bot that's waiting for a response from us, and depending on what we say, it takes action. And so if we go back to portal, so here we have only one tag, we'll refresh the item detail page. Hopefully all the tags are there, and there they are. And so just like that, we built an automated workflow to kind of curate items before they're shared out to the public. And obviously you could do, anything. You could prevent, if that item is shared and it doesn't meet the requirements, you could just unshare it and add the properties back.
Okay, great. So we have listed some admin tips when you are working with webhooks. Avoid redundancy. What we mean by here is that do not create multiple webhooks with similar events. For example, if you already have a webhook which is listening to a high level event like all item changes, you probably don't need another event webhook which is listening to specific item changes, because these two will generate duplicate messages. On the security aspect, make sure your receiver can communicate with your portal and has valid certificate. And when troubleshooting, always use the portal logs, and also debug logs will give you more information. And you can check the notification status link on each webhook under each webhook ID. This will give you more information about previous statuses. And if you need it, you can deactivate a webhook and activate it later, and use a forward proxy like Fiddler to examine the outgoing messages from the portal. We have exposed number of advanced settings to fine-tune the webhook delivery. For example, the number of delivery attempts, notification timeouts, and the elapsed time between delivery attempts are those. So with that, we conclude our presentation, and since this is our first release, please let us know if you want us to support new events. And many of you asked about the feature service support and when it is available in online. We are actively working on that and hope to make them available in incoming releases. And also, you can use the GeoNet to give us some feedback. We are actively monitoring the GeoNet. Now? It doesn't switch.
Because you're in presenter mode?
Okay, maybe. Right. So do give us your feedback through the GeoNet. We actively monitor it, and we are planning to make available more webhook receivers in different languages like Node.js and Python Flask, so that you guys can head start on webhooks. We are at the Enterprise SDK island, so if you have questions, please come and visit us. I don't think we have much time for questions right now, because the next one is going to start soon. And yeah, don't forget to fill out our survey on that. Right? Thank you very much.